the organisation that has been sponsoring or paying for this campaign about fracking, about talking about it. As you will probably know, charities are not obliged to discuss who gives them funding, but for the sake of transparency, just so you all know, and we also know that, you know, in other areas of charitable foundations, they particularly don't tell people who funds them. For the sake of transparency, I can tell you that it's myself, my mother Vivian Westwood, and Lush, the cosmetics company, that have paid for this particular project in trying to educate or trying to talk about fracking anyway, and to get people talking about it and trying to investigate it for themselves. First of all, regrettably, on one hand, this is not the debate we had wished for. We had gone to our best efforts to try to invite the pro-fracking side to come and discuss with us and have a proper debate. However, they have either declined our invitations or have stalled us or have not managed to kind of get themselves together enough to kind of come debate. So we have a panel discussion instead of that. It's worth noting that I think some credit should be given to Dan Biles MP, by the way, because he was initially very enthusiastic about joining in the panel and talking to us, but it seems that he wasn't able to persuade anybody else to come with him. What else do I want to say? I want to say that 9 months ago, I didn't really know anything about fracking. I'd heard a little bit about it, and I started at that point to investigate it and to try to research what it really meant. And what I found gave me a lot of concern. As a result of that, that's why we decided together that something needed to be done, particularly when we realised that the government is in the process of licensing up to 65% of the UK landmass for fracking, yet the majority of the country have no idea what it is. This is a question about our democracy, to me, as much as anything. It's a question of a situation where you have a government with no democratic mandate to be pushing this thing through. David Cameron's government coalition was brought in under the banner of the greenest government ever. Nobody voted for this, yet we have legislation being rushed through Parliament that seeks to even sweep away the rights that we have to stop people in trespass drilling even under our homes and under our farms. What have we learned? Well, we've been to all the countries around the UK. We've been to Scotland, England and Wales. We've been to the towns, we've spoken to the people. They were also slightly disappointed that nobody would show up for the pro-fracking side to answer the valid questions that they had. In some instances, we've been touched by the fact that people who had come to those events initially on the pro-fracking side and the support of fracking, the very fact that nobody turned up to defend the pro-fracking side, by the end of the discussion rather than debate, they had decided to change their minds purely because no one had turned up on the pro-fracking side. Anyway, we also decided to try to gather together as much as we could the questions and the genuine concerns that people had around the country about what fracking meant to them, so that we could sort of pull that information, put them into clear questions and put them forward to the government so that we could go back to those people and give them the answers. For example, we now know that Legal and General have said that anybody living within a 2-mile radius of a fracking site is likely to have their properties devalued by 25%. The insurance industry has also had advice that many of these drilling companies will not be insurable, and people's houses will not be insurable, even the premiums are likely to rocket. Now that's NIMBYism to a certain degree, but what comes out of that, and me coming from a background in small business and growing something from an incubation stage of a business, knows that the majority of the time, if you're getting small business loan finance, the majority of the time that loan finance is secured against your property. What's it going to mean for people when the bank suddenly finds out that actually the collateral that you've put up is either worth 25% less or has no value at all because it's unmortgageable, because it's uninsurable? This can have a great effect on our local economies and our economy as a whole. So that's one of the kind of things that we've found out. That's about it. I don't want to sort of spend any more time. I can see that John Snow is here, and he's just arrived, and I'm very pleased to see you, John. We'd like to show you a small film of the sort of word from the street, as it were, from all of the little towns that we visited and what people had to say. Thanks very much.
It was a term from Vietnam War when they got their officers.
One more time.
Fracking, catching water. Fracking. I don't even know what it means.
It's something to do with computers, isn't it?
It was a term from Vietnam War when they got their officers. Fracking is fracking, catching water, people want.
Oh, a little bit about fracking, not a great deal.
I think it's when there's drilling and it like cracks at the land, but I'm not sure what the purpose of the drilling is.
Something to do with releasing gas, and apparently it's not very good for the environment from what I've heard. There's an energy crisis at the moment. We need to find all sorts of energy.
I don't know whether I'm for fracking or not for fracking, because to be honest I don't know too much about it. All the thing I know is what I've heard on the media.
I don't feel like I have been talking about it, apart from protests that have been in the news.
It's not really like widely publicised.
Well, the problem is that no one understands it, and they're not told about it, then you just have to keep things sinking in, and if that happens then the government can push through anything they want and no one cares.
The funny thing is, it's something that's happening everywhere, and yet it's like they're trying to keep it undercover. They don't want you to know.
I wasn't aware really that it was going to happen in Wales. Is it going to happen in Wales? If fracking was going to an area near me, yeah, I definitely want to know more about what it is.
We should have the right to say yes, this can happen, and no, fracking can't happen.
You're a farmer in a rural community. But if Donald comes along and says, we're going to collect your land, pal. How are you? Yeah. You're going to collect yourself.
Well, that's it. Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Vivian. Thank you very much for putting this gig together. Do I speak to this? Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for putting this gig together. I am your objective, dispassionate chair. I'm with the man from Westminster. Don't know too much about it, but I've had to talk about it on the news quite a lot. I don't know, I'm between earthquakes in Blackpool and saving the Americans' economic underpants. It seems, you listen to one tale, you'll hear another. So tonight we're going to try and talk about fracking and try to make sense of it. And we'd like to make more sense of it because we did invite people from the industry and they didn't want to talk about it, which is interesting. Because, there's plenty to talk about, and they reckon they have a good story, so it would be great to hear it. So we're putting out the offer again to talk at the next meeting that's going to be held, where I'm going to turn up again and try to be a good, objective, balanced chair to reassure all sides that we can talk evenly about this issue. And we're going to have a deal on July the 14th. So you've got 3 weeks to get your shit together, chaps. So we really, really advertise this because there are women in fracking too. Let's try and get a really even and interesting and informative debate together. But we're going to have it tonight too, because here on our panel, says he turned to his rather bicycle-infected sheet of paper, because it's got a bit tangled up in my chain. On the end here, Tina Louise, who I know as inveterate emailer, blogger, contactor. I've had her in my own inbox more than I think I've had my own wife. We regard her as the battling grandmother from Blackpool. She has suffered the shivers, whatever it was that happened when the quake occurred. Elizabeth Arnold, campaigner from Pennsylvania, where they've been fracking for 9 years, with lots of experience there. Paul Bobs, ecological futurologist, consummate expert on the science, politics, and economics of fracking. That's what it says on my bit of paper. Down the end there, Mike Stein from the Trillium Fund, expert on renewables. He's in with the renewables industry. Millie Darling, it says you're only 22, but I think you're more than that. It says you're only 22.
Yeah.
I'm impressed. Very good, very good. Climate campaigner and community-owned renewable projects activist. And John Ashton, a climate diplomat. And I'm really extremely grateful to you turning out, John, because you were in a sense, it when it comes to perhaps a balance.
I'm an escape diplomat these days, I should stress that.
Well, once a diplomat, always a diplomat. Very hard to shape the language. I find when I talk to retired diplomats. But maybe you're not retired.
I'm 22, but I am retired. I'm an itinerant pontificator.
Well,
Speaking only for myself.
that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. Everyone's speaking for themselves. So, let's get the ball rolling. Tina Louise, because you've been in my inbox so often, I wanted you to start things going. You've experienced it in Britain, then we'll go to Pennsylvania.
Good evening. Tina Rothery from Blackpool. And I used to start when we first found out about fracking 2.5 years ago, when we had the first instance, I should do that, shouldn't I? We had the first instance of high-volume hydraulic fracturing in this country in 2011. It led to 2 quite minor seismic occurrences, admittedly, and often you'll hear them talking about how it was only lightly felt. We actually never queried, oh, how light did that feel? We all wondered what on earth just happened underground and what caused that. It took Quadrilla over 6 weeks to admit it was them, and the whole time they were continuing to drill and frack and push slick water into a fault line. We have no idea when the payback from that goes. And so this was our first instance of hearing about fracking in Lancashire. Had it not been for those earthquakes, I don't doubt we would be knee-deep in the stuff by now. So some of us found out about it. We formed a small group called Residents Action on Failed Fracking. It was never intended to oppose something we didn't understand. And it was intended that we would just say, hey, slow down. Let's find out a little bit more about this before you decide to go on to the next leg of this. Because a moratorium was put in place and it wasn't released till December 2012. So we had that pause to gather our thoughts, gather our research, and encounter people who had, in the States, brought us some knowledge of what it was actually like. So that rather than listening to Quadrilla or the government telling us, oh, statistically this, and gold standard this, and so on in their reports, we went and spoke to real people who lived it, breathed it, experienced it, saw their livestock die. We had people like Marianne Lloyd-Smith. She's a consultant chemist for the UN on toxicity, come and speak to us. We spoke to other people who come over from Canada, from Australia, where they'd experienced it. And we found a huge cause for concern. And imagining at that point that this was a democracy, we all thought that if we signed the petitions, lobbied our MPs, and pushed in every lawful, legal way we could to object to all planning, that somewhere along the line, someone would see sense and wisdom. In 2.5 years, this just doesn't happen. And we remain astounded that this stuff continues to plough through. They just put through a 6,000-page document, planning document in Blackpool for the next genuine high-volume hydraulic fracturing to go ahead. You'll hear a lot about the little sites throughout the country where there's exploratory drilling. This is not the same thing at all. This is just to get the well in and be one step ahead of planning. When they go to full production on 24-hour illumination, 7 days a week, it's crazy. When I started this, getting involved in this, I used to say something like, I'm just a grandma from Blackpool. But now I very boldly say I'm one of the grandmas in this country who is damn more concerned with righteous reason to be about the future for my grandchild. She needs air and water. It would be very, very irresponsible of anyone in this room to leave that sort of awareness of the future to chance. Every one of us is responsible for what we leave behind. And you see the diversity in this room. We see that in all our community groups. There was a handful of community groups opposing this 2.5 years ago. We are now 180 community groups strong. We have protectors on community protection camps that slow the trucks and allow us the time to do the research and get the information out so that more people have access to truth and can make their decisions based on knowledge rather than just spin and marketing.
Tina Louise, thank you very much. What's your experience?
Actually, the first permits were issued in 2002, but fracking really took off around 2007, 2008. And of course, the mental health issues that come along with not initially knowing what's happening to you, and the emotional hardship that comes along with losing your health and seeing your family in pain and your life uprooted from the land you can no longer live on. And of course, the frustration and betrayal that comes with being ignored and lied to by the agencies that are supposed to protect you. Our state governor, like your government here, has lied to the public about water contamination. We have over 150 cases of documented water contamination in Pennsylvania, as there are documented cases of water contamination in other states in the United States. And these were determined by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, which has really not been a department that has protected us, but even they admit in these over 150 cases that this water was contaminated due to fracking. So if anybody wants a printout of those documents, I'm happy to give them to you after. Hundreds of families in Pennsylvania are still waiting to get their water tested and to have it determined what exactly is in it and where that came from. As are people in Texas, Wyoming, Colorado. And in the meantime, we are supplying water for communities. So we're fundraising to get, and local churches and local communities and neighbors are buying water and delivering it to the homes of people who've literally been living without water that they can drink with, cook with, or bathe in for years now. Because the companies and the government are not taking responsibility or fulfilling their obligations. So this is what's happening in Pennsylvania, but I really want to stress that it really doesn't matter where you live or what the geology under your feet is. Our bodies respond to these toxins the same. And the it's not just the toxins in the frac fluid, it's the radioactive material that comes up to the surface with the frac fluid after you frac. The radioactive material is, there's different types of radiation that come back in the frac fluid, and I can tell you more about that after, but there's not a lot of time. But it could actually be even worse in the UK in the sense that, people have signed leases in the US. They have legal documents that say, they have a right to X amount of money or X amount of responsibility with these companies, and yet they've been betrayed, they've been cheated, and that's a signed contract. In the UK, you're not going to get a signed contract. The government's going to frack under your feet, whether you want it to or not. They're going to let these companies come in, and they're not going to consult you, and they're not even going to have to deal with you. So you should be worried, and you should continue to fight as hard as you have been and as hard as you can. So in conclusion, these gas companies aren't obligated to provide us with cheap energy in the United States or in any country. They will sell to the highest bidder. So this myth of energy independence is a myth. But we have no obligation to allow them to profit at our expense. And our movement is global, and together we'll build our own brighter future for ourselves. Thanks.
Two who have lived or do live with fracking, you're a scientist. From your perspective, you're a scientist.
I'm actually an engineer.
Well, that's science to me.
Yes, it's science, but I can fix it. I have the dubious honour of being one of the longest serving researchers on this. I started this in 2009. Not a lot of people realise this all began under the Labour government. And what happened when we had the coalition government, it changed here. It's just happening a lot faster. And what I specialise in is research, finding huge quantities of data and then mapping it all as how it all fits together. And it's a really interesting pattern that's emerging. Back in November 2012, David Cameron gave a speech to the CBI saying, we're not very good at doing things in this country. What we're going to do is, number one, we're going to stop the people judicially reviewing us. Number two, we're not going to consult the public. Number three, we're not really going to worry about the legal niceties, we're just going to press on and do all this. And that's precisely what they've done in the last 2 years. So, in July 2013, Eric Pickles imposed a new set of planning guidelines on fracking. Every set of planning guidelines for the last 20 years has been consulted on. This was just imposed without any public consultation. July 2013, we also had the Treasury instructing the Environment Agency, you will not take 13 weeks to determine an application for a pollution permit, you will do it in 2 weeks. And these are very complex technical documents, as we heard, 6,000 pages for a plan application. In 2 weeks, you cannot do the due diligence required to make sure that you check all those potential ways you could damage the environment. Recently, the government's tried to justify its case. Now, what we should be looking at is not so much why there was opposition, as to why the government's placatory words do not placate us. And it's because they're hollow, they have absolutely no substance whatsoever. And after 5 years looking at this in Britain, I can say that it just makes no sense. And their two recent reports, the Mackay-Stone report on climate change, which came out in September last year, it's an interesting review, but it takes a very low figure for emissions that is not borne out by the most recent research in America, Australia and Canada, and divides that figure by a very high figure for gas production per well, which is 2.5 times higher than some of the figures that the United States Geological Survey used to produce an artificially low figure for how much it will affect the climate. If you reproduce their model, put the correct figures in from the latest research in North America, you find it's just as bad as coal. But for me, what I would call the dodgy dossier was the Public Health England report, which came out in October last year, where they said, we're going to look at all the research on the health impacts of shale gas up until December 2012. There were more papers produced on this issue in the first 4 months of this year than from 2009 to December 2012. So they basically put the blinkers on and said, we're going to look at this, and they ignored the bigger body of research that's come out since. And this is the problem. They're producing studies which are not necessarily wrong, but they're methodologically biased to produce the answers that they want. And with all respect to John, the media are not reporting this. They are repeating an awful lot of what the lobby groups say. But again, they're not here to defend these words. And for the last 5 years, I've been trying to get into an arena with these people. Perhaps arena is the wrong term. And put this to them, but they will not defend these words in public because one time I did get a very nice man from Quadrilla, but they are very easy to knock over, and I'm just amazed that to date the media hasn't knocked over some of these very
I would say the media is as ignorant as the citizen as to the pluses and minuses. And well, why? Because it is an extremely complex business. I mean, he's just mentioned nuclear, coal, oil, gas, right? And then you have fracking. And what we know is that this country, because of poor governance in the past, has produced 2% dependence on renewables. So how do we make up the difference? And at the moment they say we can buy time with fracking, right? Would we rather buy time with nuclear?
An OECD report came out in 1999.
Oh, yes or no?
I will say, because nobody ever says this. An OECD report in 1999 said that when nuclear to solve climate change, we will run out of uranium in 12 years. There's not enough uranium to go nuclear. Let alone the safety issues. We just don't have the fuel.
Secondly, coal. If it's no worse than fracking, keep coal going.
You're presupposing that to keep the lights on,
keep the lights on.
Only 1% of our energy consumption keeps the lights on. It's really easy to keep the lights on.
Well, keep all the other things going.
That's a different issue. Then you're talking about economic policy, which has nothing to do with energy. It's about what sort of economy you want and what you want to get out of that. Why did we go digital broadcasting when it uses 10 times more power for transmission and reception, if we need to conserve energy?
Because people wanted to go digital.
Who wanted to go digital?
They were forced to go digital. Yeah.
Can I try and answer the question, why can't we buy time with fracking? Because we're 20 years behind the Americans on fracking. And the conditions here for doing it are far less conducive than they are in America anyway. So even if the resource turns out to be on the scale that the fracking advocates think it is, and even if we threw the kitchen sink at it, it may give us a minor change to our energy situation 20 years from now. Our energy problems are today problems. And a 20-year whatever we think about climate change.
Well, we'll come back to the today problem in just a moment. Let's now just turn to Michael. And Michael, you're about renewables. You're not going to pretend you're going to have renewables in business at a sort of 80 or 90% level at all soon.
That's correct. My views, and I'm here in my personal capacity, is that fracking is a distraction. I'm totally in line with John. I believe that at a global level, unless we solve the problems of carbon emissions urgently, none of us will have any lights to turn on. We all have to be facing a rather uncertain and disastrous future. So my view is that there will be some form of agreement, a global agreement within the next 5 years. If there isn't, we're all in real trouble. I think that issues like the Somerset floods are just a foretaste. If you look at Somalia and you look at the underlying causes of piracy, it relates to desertification of Somalia, and that relates to climate change. So if we actually want to solve the problem, we've got to think really big and think like a big nation, which is Britain. And it's my adopted home because it's full of amazing creative energy. And I think it is extraordinary to me that the home of democracy, we live in a world where politicians have 5-year electoral cycles trying to solve the 25-year generational issue called climate change. And I think that if we keep thinking like politicians and we're driven by 5-year business plans, I've never seen a business plan in business that's longer than 5 years, to try and solve a problem like climate change, we are going to be in big trouble. And I believe that fracking is just part of the distraction. We need to get our energy and our rare capital resources, our financial resources, focused on a sustainable future, a renewable future, however that happens. And so again, I'm with John, we're 20 years behind America. This is a complete distraction. If you look at the industry and the way every industry overstates its claims. I mean, I'm a medical doctor by background. You know, in the 1940s, we were promoting cigarette smoking. Okay, so every industry, you know, does its thing in the time, but it beggars common sense to believe that fracking in our green and fertile land, which is a small land compared to the United States, is going to even give us minor relief in terms of carbon emissions.
Michael, the United States is responsible for 25% of the world's carbon emissions. Right? That's agreed. Britain is responsible for 3%.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Britain could come up with something which perhaps does obey our carbon emissions, but there is no evidence that the United States is doing anything about it at all. Of course, if it goes to fracking, that won't make any difference either. I was in New York 2 weeks ago. The temperature, the average temperature in every building I went into was somewhere around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Kind of, 15 centigrade. I mean, seriously, you need to sweat. I mean, there's not even the beginnings of an attempt to do it. So, in a sense, anything we do is neutralized by them.
And the Canadians, yes, with the coal tar sands. So, yeah, I totally agree with you that this is a global issue. But Britain, as a nation, has got an unusually large voice for the size of its nation around the Security Council. I think that it's time for our leaders to really grasp the nettle and start a powerful lobby, which John, in fact, has led, and I would hope would re-lead it, if you like. But I think that we've got to persuade our leadership through our voting patterns that this is an issue that affects us all, and if we can't persuade the Americans, the Chinese, the Indians, the Brazilians, everybody, we're in serious trouble. And so I think that...
Okay, we'll return to that. Millie, give us your perspective.
Okay, so hello, my name is Millie, and I'm going to talk about community energy projects, because I am really passionate about investment in renewables, and I see communities as having a big part in that. So, up and down the country, communities are coming together to form energy cooperatives, and people become members of these co-ops, they buy shares in the co-op, and then the co-op uses that money to install renewable energy on local buildings or local sites. This electricity is then sold to the grid or sold to the site, and the money goes back to the members of the co-ops or into community funds that can fund initiatives such as energy efficiency or youth work in the local areas. So I'm involved in an energy co-op that's been set up in Hackney, where we're planning to install 120 kilowatts of solar on some big flat roofs on an estate. And this will save 41 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year as compared to grid electricity. And we're also running an internship programme on the estate with young people from the estate who are learning about the cooperative business model and will be involved in the installation. Another example of an energy co-op that's recently been set up is in Borkham, and Borkham last summer became the poster child for fracking, and there were many protests down there, and that got lots of people in the village thinking about energy and their energy use. So they got together, they formed an energy co-op called Repower Borkham, and they're planning to generate the equivalent of 100% of their village's electricity needs from renewable sources. And they've already got their first site lined up, so they'll be installing solar panels on a big flat roof.
We'll come back to some of those things in a moment. John, why don't you give us your perspective?
John, thank you. I think I've been invited here to say something about climate change. I mean, it's really not complicated, and it doesn't take 3 minutes to do that bit. You can be in favour of fracking for shale gas, or you can be in favour of fixing the climate. But you can't be in favour of fracking for shale gas and fixing the climate.
Yeah, yeah.
The reason for that is to fix the climate, we need to build a carbon-neutral energy system. That means using electricity to get our heating and our transport. It means using energy much more efficiently than we use it at the moment. And Britain, disgracefully, is one of the most energy wasteful countries in Europe right now. And it means taking carbon emissions out of the electricity system through renewables. We know how to do all of that. We have the technologies to do all of it. And actually, we can afford to do it. We can afford to do it if we do it in a smart way. We can afford to do it in a way which is good for the economy in the short term as well as the long term. And to those who say, well, it's going to take too long, I mean, Germany last month had a morning where it was getting 60% of its electricity from renewables. And it now has moments where it's generating more than 100% of its demand from renewables. And that's because they've had active policies to bring this forward. As for the diplomacy, I mean, John, we don't exist in sort of separate, hermetically separated boxes. We copy each other. And, you know, when I was a climate change envoy, I was going around the world trying to build alliances with people to push up the level of ambition in other countries. I've just come back from China. And in Britain and China, believe it or not, Britain has a reputation for being a pioneer in building a low-carbon economy. And that has greatly strengthened the forces in China who want to do the same thing. Ironically, who have now become much stronger in their system than the sort of equivalent forces in our system. But if people start to look at us and say, actually, that's stopped now in Britain, and what they're doing now is locking themselves back into the high-carbon economy through fracking, then I'm afraid that cuts off our diplomacy at its knees and greatly weakens not just the British effort but the global effort. I've nearly used up my time, but I just want to say one other thing. I mean, I left the government 2 years ago because I was becoming increasingly concerned at the growing gap between British politics and the British people. And the growing gap between the view of the economy, which seems to be sort of held within, at least within the kind of mainstream of British politics, and the real economy, which is something the British people understand, particularly after the events of 2008. And the debate about fracking is a perfect illustration of those two gaps. Politically, what this is about is to create short-term opportunities for people who are not from the communities where they're going to be operating, to do something which is far more disruptive, as Tina Louise has been saying so eloquently, that they're pretending at the moment, and in a way where all of the costs and all of the risks are to be borne by the communities themselves. It's fraudulent politically. It's an illusion. It just doesn't do most of the things that are being claimed for it. Does it help to fix the climate? No, as I've explained. Does it displace coal from our energy system? No, because we're going to have to retire all of our coal in less than the time it would take to get that frack gas on stream anyway. Does it improve our energy security? Not particularly, because we'll still be importing most of our, if we keep gas in our energy system, it will still mostly be imported, at least for the next 20 years. Does it reduce the capacity of Mr. Putin to expose us to energy blackmail? No, we don't import gas from Russia. It doesn't do any of those things. And it doesn't offer any significant prospect of large-scale production, as I've said, for at least 20 years, and we need to solve our real problems in our energy system, not in 20 years, but in a much shorter time frame. What's missing is a serious conversation, and I don't hold you personally responsible, John, but I do hold the, if you like, the system of which you're partly responsible for this. There is no serious conversation about the kind of economy we want to build in this country and the kind of country we want to be. And I think people are thirsty for that conversation. They want to rally about a positive vision for the economy that brings people together. And the main reason why I think fracking isn't a terribly good idea is because I think actually it's something that will drive people apart, not bring people together, and we need to be brought together. Thank you.
Issue which has emerged from whatever it is said is that a new kind of economy has to be built. But you know, that takes time. How quickly do you actually seriously think, Michael, that you could see a situation in which, I mean, actually, I think the German figure is 20% guaranteed renewables. And then after that, there are problems. Now, we have 3% or 2% actually, and then we can deposit 2 years ago. So, how quickly can you push 2% to, let's say, 20% to catch up with the Germans? How quickly and how?
Well, this is a nation that has fought 2 world wars. This is a nation that, if it puts its mind to a problem, can solve that problem. I've no doubt about that. It's a question of will. As John's pointed out, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of political leadership. And it seems to me that that leadership is going to have to come from the people, us the people like How can you do it?
In the short term, you have to persuade people in the winter to wear sweaters in their houses, for example.
Why not?
No. Why not?
Well, I don't think so, because I think that we have alternatives. We have alternatives. We do have.
The reason I'm pushing this question is the argument being made by people who support fracking is that it buys us time to get developing all the other things. But of course, here it's going to take so long to get fracking.
I believe we need to build, John, interconnectors with Norway, improve the interconnections with the rest of the continent to build a smart grid. We need to start that work now. Therefore, I believe the whole fracking debate is a distraction. We need to put our capital to work into building more solar. There's huge, vast areas, for example, reservoirs that need to be covered over because of algal blooms in the summer that could be covered with solar panels. As one example, in London alone, that's 150 megawatts of capacity right there. So companies, for example, Thames Water are beginning to look at this. They need more encouragement, and they are going to get that encouragement. Wind opportunities, the whole debate of onshore, offshore. The government is certainly pushing offshore wind, which I think is an excellent thing, but we shouldn't forget onshore wind. And again, the whole issue of what these things look like, how ugly they are and so on in terms of wind turbines. I'm reminded of the Battersea Power Station and the whole debate of, jeepers, what an ugly building that was. There was a massive planning issue around Battersea when it was built, many, many moons ago. And today, it's a great two-listed building. It's iconic. So I can see a time when, for example, wind turbines would actually look quite beautiful to people. I think it's a matter of perception. Things like Battersea Power Station can look beautiful to people. I think certainly wind turbines can look beautiful to people. I think it's a question of priorities. If we want to prioritise.
Let's bring it then to the core of the debate, because there are some people here who do look at fracking from an essentially supportive position. One or two people here. Without calling the rest of it, I would really like a chance for one or two of them to say something, and then we will respond to what they have to say. And I believe Dr. Nick Riley is here. Dr. Nick, would you like to take this microphone and just give us a sort of reaction to what you heard and maybe the argument for fracking?
Just to give my credentials, I am a geologist. I did a PhD on shales. I come from northwest England. I grew up with coal mines around me, brick pits, quarries, steam trains, iron foundries, gasifiers, etc. There's been so much said tonight, where do I start? I think, John, you actually touched on two really important points. And this is, if we are going to go through with the renewables future, and you touched on the fact that human behaviour is very important, wearing a sweater. And the other is, it is quite a difficult thing to do. And Germany is mentioned. There's a lot of figures being bandied about, and people are confusing figures such as how much electricity is generated on a certain day with the energy for a country. Can anyone tell me how much renewable energy is actually consumed in Germany compared to its entire energy consumption?
Talk about fracking.
You've got to talk about the smart grid. Talk about the smart grid.
Let him speak.
I think it's important that things are in context and there's real factual debate here. Because, excuse me, just let me finish. Am I allowed to speak? Because I'll just sit down if I'm wrong. I'm not going to argue with people interrupting me. Thank you. I personally think we do need much more renewables in our energy future. I am a geologist and I know about what climate change has done in the geological past. And I also know about ocean acidification, which hasn't been mentioned tonight. So CO2 growing in the atmosphere is a massive threat. We do need to move to a zero carbon future. What I'm trying to tell you is that it's very, very difficult to get there. And there's a huge amount of over-optimism, just as there could be over-optimism about how much gas is in the ground from fracking as well. Both sides of the debate seem to me to have flaws. And all I'm saying is, since no one seems to be able to answer the question about Germany, only 12% of Germany's energy is from renewables. They spent over 100 billion euros in subsidies to get to 12%. Their CO2 emissions are rising. Okay, I've got the German government figures. Actually, was with the German minister earlier this year. I'm very happy to supply them. These are not my figures, they're the German government's own figures. So, it's an incredibly long period of time to build that infrastructure up. Also, there are a lot of emissions associated with building that infrastructure. So you think of all the metal and the concrete and all the cabling you've got to put in. It is a massive, massive task. I'm not against us going there, but it isn't as simple as many people might think. And I think, you know, the evidence from Germany is it is exceptionally difficult, especially if you won't have nuclear in your mix, which is where Germany is as well. Austria also has a similar figure to Germany, despite the fact it has more hydro than any other country in the EU.
Nick, would you take a question? I'm only going to take one or two
Right, okay.
because we can go on all night. So, the guy with the pencil. We'll just stick up with the pencil. There you are.
How does that... Hello? How does that compare to peak bank support? Yeah. Oh, sorry. How does that compare to how much we bail out banks? Peak bank support is 1.2 trillion. How much do you say it took to get up to 12%?
Germany spent over €100 and they will be spending far more. Hang on. I've just told you the figure. Last October they got to €100 billion of subsidy for renewables. They're locked into many more millions, hundreds of millions of euros at least because of feed-in tariffs. So I'm just telling you what it's cost Germany so far and where they are. Okay? And they are seen as the lead country in this argument, as was stated from the panel.
I'll take one more question just at the back. The woman in the back with another pencil in the air and the white paper in the air.
Can you actually try
What's your view on combining the nuclear with fracking close by?
Well, they're completely separate technologies. I personally think that to get to zero carbon is so difficult that to only have a renewables and energy efficiency future, you won't get there, and you really do need nuclear in the mix. We've got to do it in 50 years if the 2 degrees Celsius limit is to be believed.
I want to thank Nick Riley very warmly for stepping up, and we may fall back. Let me just get a reaction. Did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the International Energy Agency report that came out recently that said we need to spend $46 trillion by 2035 to meet our energy needs, and how much the United States in particular spends subsidizing the oil and gas industry. I don't think this is a question of money. I think, as our other panelists have said, you know, where there's a will, there's a way, and so it really is a question of the public and political will.
That's a very interesting point, because one thing is worth mentioning, and I mean, this is important, is that actually one of the reasons why Germany was able to get a lead on this was because of the reunification of Germany. If you go to Germany, the vast bulk of the wind farms are in East Germany.
It didn't have any oil companies.
Sorry?
It didn't have any oil companies telling the government what to do.
Well,
they were blessed with Siemens and round lumber with BP Shell.
But the great thing about it was they could ride roughshod off the people who were so thrilled to get back into the Western world that they just rolled roughshod across the farmland with the rest of no planning permission, nothing. They just put it up, which is great. But I mean, that's the way you do it. You can't do it that in every country.
Can I add that there is a 60% tax incentive for the fracking industry in this country, which is not happening to renewables. So if you talk about subsidies on renewables, well, by the same token, the shale gas industry is going to get a 60% tax break, so that money's not coming back into our economy.
Gas pipeline down the spine of the country. Just Google images and put gas grid UK and you'll see. And you can also generate electricity directly as well.
I'll just tell you that I went to the Outer Hebrides the other day to look at the state of the independence vote in Scotland. And I saw the very impressive wind arrays up there, the wind farms, because it's the windiest place in Britain. But believe it or not, every wind farm, out of the 8 turbines, 3 are idle. And when you ask them, well, are they broken down? They say no. The national grid has failed to put a connector in to take the energy off the island.
We need a smart grid. You've got it, John. We need a smart grid.
We need all sorts of things.
The
The question is whether we need fracking.
Can I mention very briefly, there's a group...
Can I just, Nick raised the issue, I think we call it over-optimism. I just want to just raise that. And by the way, I do think we need to listen to each other with respect in this conversation. This is a hard problem. It's not an easy problem. Dealing with climate change, building a modern energy system, even without the problem of climate change, is a hard problem. And Liz is absolutely right. It's about political will. It's about what kind of country do we want and how much effort we're prepared to build that country. I spend a lot of my time now seeking out and listening to people who were adults in the period immediately after World War II, because I think that's a really interesting reference point for this conversation. We came out of World War II with our cities bombed to bits. I remember bomb sites in the street where I was growing up, like gaps in a row of teeth. We were far more in debt. Our fiscal problem was far greater than our fiscal problems today. And we were much poorer as a country. And yet, within a few years, we had rebuilt our cities. We had modernized our national infrastructure. And we had also laid the foundation for a health service, a pension system, a welfare settlement that only now, 60 years later, is beginning to come apart. We did far more then than we've been asked to do now, with far less. And I ask myself, if we could do that then, surely we can do it now, if that's what we really want to do.
If Jamie is speaking with the mic, I want to take a cluster of questions and we'll then do a round robin of answers. So I would like these to start with the guy with glasses there, the one, and then the woman behind him, and then we'll come over here. Yeah. Mr. Wilbur, everything you said.
Hi, I'm Smarr McCarthy. I'm from Iceland, a country that, with the exception of some imports of oil, basically runs entirely on renewables. But on top of that, there's this really weird thing. I only moved to England a couple of months ago, and I'm wondering, why do people not insulate their houses? Why do people worry about putting sweaters on in their houses when they could be putting sweaters on the houses themselves? The options for energy efficiency are there, and you just have to take them and stop thinking in terms of really old, really broken infrastructure.
Good point.
I'm just wondering what Dr. Nix might think about the radon in the domestic supply that's currently being piped into the New York grid at the moment, and how the UK would manage the health risks that are currently completely illegal for the EU regulations that are very good regulations. Are we going to deregulate all of that?
Okay, thank you very much. And then I want to go over here. We'll go to the man in the hat. The man in the hat with the beard. And then forward to the man with glasses. We'll keep your hand up so you know which one you are. Man in the hat. I'll take the microphone across.
And climate change. Could the solution be actually in nature? I've looked at it, I've done a lot of research over the past 2 months, particularly as a gentleman in the renewable industry. Are you aware of hemp as a possible solution?
Did you say hemp?
Yes.
And then one to this guy here, please. Or when you take the question, okay, you and then you. Yeah. Okay, well, I just like to make a point. Can you stand up?
Okay, good. And the point I want to make is that nobody's really paying attention to the global catastrophic crisis that the whole world system is in. Capitalism isn't about to give anyone anything, and none of the solutions being proposed here is going to happen if the big corporations don't want to do it. And they're all desperate at the moment. They're locked into global trade war. It's the biggest crisis we've ever seen in history. We're not going to solve anything until we sort out that problem. We need to have a revolution, get rid of this capitalist system, then we can sort out
in in Westminster tonight. She's got the word revolution on one leg and climate on the other. She's halfway there with you. Right, let's take, yes, you go ahead.
There's no one anywhere tonight representing you the Carlisle group and such people, so perhaps I can try and kind of conceptualise them as I see them. And stand up.
Stand up, we can't.
We've got trillions of investment capital.
Yeah,
we've got trillions in investment capital. You know, we need to get a return on that. And one way we can do that is fracking. You know, we've got the politicians behind us, they're going to subsidise it, they're going to give us tax breaks. And then you say, well, it's going to mark up the environment. Well, I say we can make money out of that as well. You know, we can charge people more for water, we can fix the water. And you're saying it's going to mark up the climate. Well, I'm saying that's brilliant. We can make a lot of money out of that as well. Engineering the climate. And, you know, you don't like it? Well, we can get security and we can make good money out of that. So, you know, where do we stand with these people?
Okay.
We talk about revolution. I think that this can be done on a local level. We just do not buy into anything that you're offered. Don't drive a car. Wear sweaters. Be careful with the water. Turn the lights off. Just save energy. If every single person took responsibility for that, we'd put them all out of business. You know?
That's you, maybe. That chimes with your think local, think community, think individual.
Yeah, think community, I think chimes with me. So yeah, I sympathise with lots of what people were saying just now, and I think the younger generation feels especially betrayed by the political class who just don't represent us. And you know, recently we were lied to about tuition fees. So I think lots of young people don't vote now. Like lots of young people feel completely alienated from politics and just don't understand. You know, they see climate change happening. I've been learning about climate change at school all my life and not seen it being solved. I remember learning about it in primary school and thinking, why aren't we solving it then? So I think a lot of us have just got to the point of thinking we need to build the solutions ourselves, and that's why I'm involved in setting up the energy factory and working with the community of Balkan, because we've got to just build these solutions ourselves. The political class don't represent us.
I'll just take the questions in order. I'll just contribute one thing from the chair. I have one idea, which I hope one day somebody will embrace. And that is on the question of insulating homes. You have 2 million people unemployed. It should be possible to develop squads of people who are unemployed, and instead of paying them the benefit, pay them at least the living wage, to join squads supervised by perfectly competent leadership and take them on inventories of every house in the country. You can run a census, so why can't you run a survey of every house in the country? And you build every house requires insulation, and insulation is actually a terribly easy job. I mean, injecting into the walls is a bit tricky, but you can get people to do that. What you really need is the people to do the roof and the whole business of unrolling the filthy old fiberglass stuff. And that can be done. And not a hugely skilled job. I think I'm right in saying it, am I not? You are favourite.
Can everybody do that?
Yep.
Right. Every 1 degree you reduce the temperature of your house, you save 10% on space heating, because it's non-linear. So if you turn it down to an average 16 degrees, you can knock up to half off your space heating bill. But that means insulating the bits that matter and not the building. You need to wear sensible clothing. And this is a problem. The whole argument presupposes a certain set of economic relations and fashion and that sort of thing. And we've had this idea of voluntary simplicity. The bit we're missing out on is involuntary simplicity. In the last few years, America has saved 16% of its energy consumption. Britain has saved 12% of its energy consumption. How did they make that startling change? Recession. If you could engineer a recession without the negative social impacts, we can massively reduce resource use and carbon emissions. But that is not on the agenda. Now, if you look at the very early founders of economics, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, they all believed the economy would grow and then stop and level out. It's the first budget in Britain where growth was the policy, was wrapped up as budget of 1954. Before that, the policy was balanced in the books. Growth is a very modern concept that is not based in physical reality. And that's the discussion we're having.
Which embraces both corruption and money.
John, just with a little bit of trepidation, I'm glad that you come back to that question. We're locked into a system which assumes that if you can't put a price on something, it has no value. And we all know that's nonsense.
Yeah.
We all know that's nonsense. And furthermore, it's a system which, whether by accident or design, I don't think many people really want to go to their grave troubled by the kind of what's on their conscience from it, but it's evolved so that it's created a kind of self-reinforcing machine based on plunder. It plunders resources from poor people who are not well organised, who don't have much political power, so that more of them go to rich people who are well organised and who can manipulate the way markets work in their interests. And which is an old problem. That's a problem that's been going on for centuries, and it's under current debate at the moment because of the recent book by the French economist Thomas Piketty. But there's a new problem on top of that, which is that the same machine also plunders resources from natural systems, beyond the point where those natural systems can recover. And that's what the climate problem is all about. If you destabilise the climate, you can't get that back. Doesn't matter how much, it's irreversible to all intents and purposes. And so that, it's like being sort of chained to a wild animal. In Europe, I was in China the other day, you get a sense that if we're chained to a tortoise, China is chained to a tiger, but it's a wild animal that we can't control, and it threatens to pull us over a precipice. So I kind of agree with where you're coming from, but I'm also very disturbed by the implications, because if you're going to pull down the system, you better have a pretty good idea of what you want in its place. Yeah. And you better know how to do the politics. You better know how to do the politics to build it, because otherwise it ends in tears. And if you don't believe me, go to China and talk to the people who experienced the land reform and the Great Leap Forward and the Great Cultural Revolution. Is actually doable, and it's doable within a generation with the resources that we have, and I think that we will find that as we do it, we will learn again about the value of things that don't have a price, and we will be building a new impulse that will make this country in all kinds of other ways a better place, as well as fixing the immediate energy and climate problem.
You know about capitalism because you used to be a capitalist. In fact, you probably still are. But you know about capitalism, but you also know probably about hemp. Could you hemp it up a bit?
Yes, indeed. Well, it's a crop which, like all crops, will take solar energy, sunlight, and convert it into biomass. And you use that biomass to generate heat and electricity. One of the issues there as a solution for Britain is the amount of agricultural land that is available, and also the fact that photosynthesis as a mechanism for converting sunlight into energy is actually pretty poor. It's only about at most 3 to 4% efficient. And the solar panels that we're now manufacturing are already 19-20% efficient, and the ones in the pipeline are 31%, which was the theoretical maximum, and now they're going above that because they're actually able to capture more parts of the solar spectrum, more parts of the wavelength of light, so that we're actually now looking at 45% efficiencies. So, as a solution, it is part of the biomass solution, but at a sort of national level, I think it would be preferable to put solar panels, very highly efficient solar panels, on commercial roof space, on contaminated land, wherever we don't need the space, along highways, on reservoirs that are not used for sailing and recreation.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm just going to ask Paul very quickly to answer. Radon.
Increased radiation with radon is a hazard. It's more of a hazard than earthquakes, but actually it's dwarfed by the increased hazard of road traffic accidents due to all the lorries going to and from the fracking sites.
Tina Louise, you want to say something?
When we were talking about revolution and change, but we're also here to talk about fracking, I think the two come together very beautifully. Just recently in our groups, because we've been growing so numerous in our communities, we've watched the absolute beauty of waking up the inner activist in people you would never imagine to become active in a community. And people coming together and not saying, what's your politics, you know, who did you vote for, who's your God, who do you think should win X Factor, and what's your football team? None of them asked those questions. They looked at the problem, which was fracking, and said we need to stop this, and the only way we do it is together. And each of these communities self-activated. And I've seen so much power in the way that they're scaring people. We've been told, asked repeatedly by our media and by the industry itself, why don't you just become one group? Then we will be able to speak to you. You're just one spokesperson. And we said that we didn't need one spokesperson, because you could ask Paddy down in Balcombe, or you could ask Foxy over at Barton Moss site, or you could ask me or Vanessa or anyone. We have one bucket of truth and one bucket of questions. And it's all the same. We don't need to cover our backs by having one PR spokesperson to tie it all together. But you know, that whole change that we're looking for comes down to what Millie said. You power a community. You don't say, oh, the lights are going down. And no offense, Nick, but you know, we're here to talk about fracking, and you seem to direct the conversation away from that. Like we find all industry people we've been trying to engage with. I don't mean to isolate you, it must be awful. I think you're very brave to come into the room, and thank you.
Yes.
And we start doing that. And I think that's where your revolution grows from the bottom up.
I just want to say this is really what we need to be focused on, is building community. That is essential, and that's what everybody everywhere in the world should be focused on. But just to address the radon question, there's the radioactive material that comes back in flowback fluid from fracking. Depending on what water you test in Pennsylvania, right, that contains flowback fluid, it could range, the levels of radium will range from 242 times to 3,609 times the safe level of the federal standard for safe drinking water. That's level of radium in drinking water in Pennsylvania, depending on, you know, whether it's been impacted by fracking or not.
Thank you very much. I mean, we're going to take another pool of questions, but there's a very prominent hand up in the front row. So I'm going to invite Vivian Westwood to have a word.
Thank you. It's going to take a minute, so I'll just turn this way. I want particularly to engage this gentleman as well in the answers, but it is I'm making a point, but I'm also asking about the point I'm making as well. So I don't think that we have really answered the question of energy security. And the idea that we've got this energy security and through fracking will give us energy security. And the first thing I want to say is that the government's statements are very emotional, and they have been making us feel quite safe. Security means that you feel safe and that you're not frightened so much anymore. The government's going to look after you and keep you secure. And the implication there somehow is that this gas that they can get out of the rocks when they frack them is ours. Now, why is that gas ours? Why is it different than what usually happens? What usually happens is that it belongs to the people who have the concession to frack. And it's quite possible that in between 10 to 15 years, when they're ready to do that solar will be in competition with this, and it might even be the cheapest energy that there is. And so, if they do have it in their portfolio, I assume that it's going to have to be subsidised to be in there. And this is one thing. So I want to ask, is this what other people think would be the case? It's not our energy, it doesn't make me feel secure. And the other thing is that bridging the gap here, well, what about all the gas that you could get by conventional methods? Doesn't have to come from Fuji, there's lots of it everywhere. And we've been told that if we take the oil and the gas that you get by conventional extraction, if you take out more than 20%, then you go into irreversible climate change. It goes faster. You can only take 20% of it. So why can't we use that in the meantime instead of getting this special gas that will be far more difficult to get? And the last thing is that this gentleman is saying that in order to get renewables, that would it cost more, or are we really? I think the argument is economic. I think you can argue this economically. Is it really going to cost more to get renewables? I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Well, I just want to get to John and Michael to respond to Vivian, and then I'll come and get a pool of questions from you. John.
Energy security. Well, first of all, just thank you, Dame Vivian, for all of the activism and commitment that you've contributed. The way you're using your voice, I think, is really important. To pick up this one piece of what you said about solar energy. In the last few weeks, we've had the chief executives of Germany's two largest electricity generators, two largest utilities, RWE and E.ON, both effectively saying in public that the business model on which their businesses are based is collapsing because of the rate at which the cost of solar photovoltaic panels has come down. The cost of solar PV has fallen much faster than even the most optimistic experts were predicting a few years ago. It's fallen partly because of the market acceleration support, the subsidies, the feed-in tariffs in Germany, but it's actually fallen much more because of the enormous effort that China has put into accelerating the growth in markets for solar panels. And the same thing is happening in America. Wall Street is now warning that the business models of American utilities are in jeopardy, and the cost of borrowing for those companies is rising as a result. And if you thought the banks were too big to fail, if you listen carefully, you can hear the utilities telling us that they're also too big to fail, and we need to slow down on this acceleration of low-carbon energy systems in order to preserve their business models. We can have what we want. It depends how we use our voices. And this is, as Tina Louise has been saying so eloquently, this is not just about our energy system. This is about whether we want to take our politics back from the very small, mutually reinforcing, self-serving elite, which at the moment seems to be taking all the decisions, centred on this little part of this city, but above all, centred on this region of our country. As I travel around, it doesn't feel to me as if I live in a single country anymore. There's the southeast, which kind of bosses everything, and wants to build a certain kind of economy, which is essentially speculative. And there's the rest of the country where the real economy used to live, and which is actually facing a huge opportunity to rebuild it. The building a low-carbon energy system is something that we would do nationally, and it would be the most revitalising thing we could do for our economy.
That's a 50-50% figure. There's a 50% probability of that. And if you were to go to the stock exchange as a company, you wouldn't be allowed to use that figure. we would have to use the 90% CERN figure, which is only 820 something. Now, of that, we might get 1 or 2%. If you annualise that over 20, 30 years, then it's never going to be more than 5 or 10% of our annual energy production from shale. Now, we are losing more than that every year as the North Sea declines. Nick, you might want to comment on that, but it's irrelevant. Fracking is just irrelevant.
What John was saying about the potential of solar and where solar is going, already southern Italy is at good parity. It's actually cheaper to put in solar panels than it is to burn coal or gas. So there are large parts of Spain, Italy, the United States. If you take the panhandle of Texas alone, you cover that with solar panels, you're powering up all the electricity needs of the United States, forevermore. So there are all sorts of amazing things that can happen with technology if we have the political will. The signal that I'm seeing in the world is that absolutely the price of solar panels is coming down. They will continue coming down. There's all sorts of amazing things in the pipeline in terms of the efficiency of those panels I referred to earlier. The problem here is that we don't have enough insulation. In other words, we don't have enough solar rays hitting the surface to actually make it viable for the near future until the efficiencies hit about 45%. We're at about 20% at the moment, so we've got a way to go. But that said, we can be doing amazing deals with our friends in Spain, in southern Spain, in southern Italy, with a smart grid. You could even get, and I can see a time when we've got, if we look at, our dependency on, or European, I shouldn't say our, but European dependency on Russian energy. If I was Angela Merkel, I'd be putting a lot more attention onto a high voltage direct current cable under the Mediterranean to friends in Morocco and looking at solar potential in Morocco at huge scale. But that needs political will, as John's talked about. And I think that's been missing from our politics across the whole of Europe. And I think that's because we, the people, are not making our voices heard clear enough. And I think we, the people, need to stand up and make our voices heard very, very clearly.
Let's just go for some questions now. Let's go for questions from the pool. And I had the hat before, so I have to let other people have a go. We take the woman with the high hand there. Who is this? The salmon here is next. You are salmon. Let's go for salmon first.
Switch it on. No, it's on. It's on. Hi, my name is Julie Wasmer. I am a Kent campaigner. East Kent Against Fracking is one of the very few groups in this country that has successfully fought applications for extreme energy exploration in this country before drillings took place. And we won on that because we had the findings of a respected hydrogeologist from the Campaign for Protection of Rural England, Kent, who showed that fracking in East Kent would have a very clear risk of irreversibly contaminating an aquifer that served 90% of that county with water. Now, since that campaign, I now sit on the Environment Committee of the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, and I can tell you clearly that anyone who has studied this issue in the last few years will know that the conflicts of interest are rife between industry and between our government. We do not have a government that is committed to renewables, to an alternative. And only last week I saw a photograph of a senior member of our Kent CPRE with Eric Pickles, and on Sunday Eric Pickles, of course, rejected a large-scale solar application and has threatened to refuse further ones. Now, I find it a really disturbing irony that the chairman of Rathlin Energy can actually be the chairman of CPRE Northants. Not only that, I discovered last week that he was part of the task and finish group that decided on the CPRE policy against fracking. CPRE are not part of the Are We Fit to Frack report. They did not sign up to that, along with many other wildlife trusts. What we have is a conflict of interest, but in spite of the proponents of fracking, and we've heard one tonight, I just want to say that communities like mine know that there are alternatives. We know that there is another way, and we will continue to pursue it. So I thank Talk Fracking for this debate, because we're not having it from our government. They do not initiate it, and they do not participate in it, and shame on them.
I think the carbon-based revolution that we've seen is dying, and what we need to do is we need to force the next revolution. And sometimes when you've got capitalist organisations that have gained their money in 200 years of raping other people's countries for fuel, and we're actually made feel scared that we don't have fuel, and we might not have heating, that's rubbish. You know, we've got to a stage now where this industrial system, which is based on hierarchy and capitalism, has to change. And sometimes my question is to you, we want democracy, but at some point in our history we have to say, no, this is not about democracy, this is about changing things, stopping these companies from ruining our future for generations ahead of us. Right. So actually we're at a tipping point now that if we don't stop taking this stuff out of the earth, we are not going backwards, and the industrial revolution and capitalism is actually dying, and we need to know how we're going to get through this, and an infrastructure has to be built now, however much it costs.
Okay. Very eloquent seconds, but we do need to have some very specific questions that we keep the debate going. So, ma'am, there you go.
I'd like to speak about health, which is the people, as I understand, the biggest fracking place I know is Alberta Tar Sands. Yes. And at Leprechaun Lake, which is on the Alberta Tar Sands area, there are a lot of Lakota tribe living, traditionally. And since the tar sands have been opened up and mined, they're now experiencing cancer at 10 times the national Canadian average. And this is an official figure, not an unofficial figure. So could someone explain to me how we can accept that as an example if we're going to lose our land and our health? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The one let's stick to the question system then.
Hi, I'm Janelle Ramco. I live on the South Downs, which is a national park of outstanding natural beauty. All of the UK is precious to whoever and wherever they live. My main issue of concern is the area that I live in, particularly, is a drought area. And where do they believe that the water's going to come for the potential fracking sites? And also, where will the contaminated water be left or be going after the fracking? Our families...
Clarification. There was a report the other day that suggested the wheel was not going to be very productive.
Yes, but we've got 3 applications on there now.
Yes. That's right. The reports have come out since the applications.
Yes, I know, but the applications are still live and they should be kicked.
Oh, just clarify, stay where you are.
The wheel is fracking for oil. Or it's tight oil which they're trying to enhance by fracturing the rock. It has a much lower prospectivity, they could get less back. But if oil prices go up any higher, with the Iran situation for example, then it prices in doing that. So whether or not they go big in the wheel is really dependent on the global oil price. But if it were to go $140, $160 a barrel, provided the economy doesn't go boom in the meantime, then that's the sort of level they might come and look at that.
Okay, but the point you raised is water, and I'll get that addressed, okay, because I'm going to try and ask a couple of people who are involved in the fracking industry to speak to that.
The recent fracking, the recent figures on that was 0.1% of oil in our area. So it's not going to be beneficial for them to be drilling for oil there.
Okay.
And I speak on behalf of the rest of the country that have drought areas. Obviously the area where I live in will be the area that I can campaign the most. But this is a very important issue also as to where these waters are going to be stored or dumped. The wider implications basically boil down to the government really not caring. There's so much personal investment within the government that all of these issues are down to money and profit and gain themselves.
Okay. This is the last one. Quite short. What time do you want us to finish? What time are we going to cut off? 5 minutes? Good God.
Hi. We heard from various members of the panel that the establishment rode roughshod over its own rules in the build-up and now and possibly the future of fracking in this country. As soon as you grasp philosophically in your head, your own head, that under this system all decisions will be made based on profit margins, on who owns the land, and not what's best for communities, individual people or wildlife habitats. As soon as you grasp that, then are we not forced to accept that the very nature of our current system, where the House of Lords are at once landowner...
5 minutes, we've had a panel and I want one other contribution from the issue. Just wondering whether Mark Linder is here, if he want to answer a question. Mark? No, but let me just ask, and I hate to ask you again,
You raised the hand.
Right? Mark, can I just ask you one question? Can you answer the question about water? And what's the question of the yellow? Could you send a mic to Mark? And again, thank you very, very much for being prepared to say something.
Thank you. So the question is, in an area where the water is tight supply, how's that regulated? Well, all the water is controlled by the local utility, and the water use has to be approved by the Environment Agency. And there's a very clear set of guidelines about that. There'd be no way that if there's a water constraint situation that this would be approved. So the regulators completely control that.
It's not looking too good for drilling in the South Downs. But I want now just to finish off with the panel, so a very, very brief health. Who would like to speak to the health issues?
I can speak to some of the health issues. We've seen a lot of health impacts. I've named some of the symptoms earlier, but we should be living by the precautionary principle when it comes to public health and our water supply. Fracking cannot be done safely when you have an 85% failure rate immediately and a 50% failure rate within 30 years. I will be alive for another 30 years and another 30 years after that. So that means I'm potentially seeing all of these wells fail in my lifetime, and that is not something I'm comfortable with, and not something any of us should be comfortable with, because no place on this planet should be a sacrifice zone. I think we're all willing to sacrifice somebody else as long as it's not ourselves, and we can't live like that because this is touching all of us. So yes, we need epidemiological studies, and they take a long time, and in the meantime, we should not be risking other people's health. We have too much evidence now from Pennsylvania alone, not to mention the rest of the areas that are being fracked, and it's just not safe. We shouldn't do it.
Oh, final word. John, final word. Got anything you want to say?
Just on the health thing, very brief. I mean, clearly there are quite a lot of very important questions about the physical health and actually the mental health consequences of fracking, which are not, I mean, to the extent that we're having a conversation at all beyond this room, they're not yet part of the conversation. And they are really serious issues, and they need to be. We need to hear from health experts and have a really serious effort. In some ways, I think that's even more important than the climate dimension, because it's so real for people. But the other point, the bigger point, I mean, there's just contrasting this, that the sense I get from those people I talked to who were around in the late 40s and early 50s and who were inspired by the national movement at that time was actually there was a sense of common purpose, a sense that we've been through something terrible which mustn't happen again, and a willingness to listen to each other with respect and to try and build something together. And there's a lot of anger in this debate. And anger is understandable. There are good reasons. People don't feel angry just for no reason. There's real reason. But I do think that we need to find ways at least of channeling our anger for constructive purposes. I think everybody who feels angry will contribute more to this. And I feel angry if we can find ways of using it to bring people together rather than drive them apart.